As America gets set to commemorate the 250th anniversary of its founding, a new AP poll reveals a nation struggling to define their identity, their role of their democratic institutions, and its place in the world. The poll reveals that only about a quarter, 25% of Americans, now believe that the United States stands above the other countries globally, and nearly 30% of Americans believe there are better countries elsewhere, which is a significant increase from the 19% recorded back in 2016. Meanwhile, the confidence in democracy as a defining feature of American independence and superiority is also declining, with only about two-thirds of Americans viewing democratically elected officials and the government at large as highly important, which is down from 80% recorded back in 2021. Younger Americans are especially skeptical, with younger adults under the age of 30 at a clip of about 44%, believing that other countries are better than the United States and America could stand to learn a lesson about leadership from their neighbors overseas. Today I'm joined by someone who has a unique and diverse perspective on American and global politics. I'm joined this week by my friend, Dr. Bernd Reiter. He's a professor of comparative politics and Latin American studies at Texas Tech University. He's an internationally recognized expert on the subjects of race, democracy, decolonization, and social change. His career began in activism across Germany, Brazil, and Colombia. He uniquely brings a truly global perspective on some of the challenges that our democracy faces today. He challenges conventional wisdom when it comes to democracy, governance, and progress. Professor Reiter argues that the solutions to our democratic challenges and aspirations cannot only come from the Western world itself, and America can stand to learn lessons from their global partners in Africa and Latin America alike. And he joined me this week all the way from Spain to tell me more. I'm Kevin McShann. Let's have this conversation. Professor, if you're ready, I'll take a moment to welcome you to the program, and I'm super excited to have a conversation, an important conversation about the state of democracy in America and the lessons America can learn. Great to see you, and happy Wednesday to you, my friend.
Thank you very much.
Absolutely. So, Professor, I wanted to start our conversation by asking you, from your perspective, I wonder if you can characterize the state of democracy, how we deal with it from a societal perspective, and how we heal the sense of division that currently is sort of present in America today. What are your thoughts there, my friend?
All right. Well, thanks again for the opportunity and give me this chance to talk about this very important topic. I think you're right. We live in a very critical time. The division and the polarization that we see all around us is threatening democracy. And what I see is that at the end, it's not the people who are so divided. It's rather the politicians that seem to pitch us against each other. And it seems like we're losing the platforms that allow us to talk to each other, as we're losing community spaces and public spaces. But I don't think that the people have to be that divided. I'm hopeful and optimistic that we find ways to overcome this division, because I know that democracy cannot survive in a climate where we do not talk to each other about policies and political preferences. And instead, what we see right now, we are pitched against each other based on culture and based on ideology, and or religion, and there's very little middle ground to be found there. We need to refocus on policy issues.
Yeah, and Professor, I'm also curious to ask you about the role that the current president and his administration is having on politics as a whole. Because no matter what you feel about the president, whether you're a fan of his policies or whether you're not, he's certainly had a impact that'll be lasting for decades on American politics. So I'm wondering your thoughts on his presence in American politics, how it's been reshaped sort of in his image, and whether you think America is a better space because of it. Why or why not? What are your thoughts there, my friend?
Well, I think what we have with President Trump is sort of historical new. We never had a president who explicitly says he doesn't want to be the president of everybody, the president of all the people. He explicitly says that he wants to be the president of those who follow him. So he contributes to this polarization. He has politicized an office that is supposed to stand above this political division. So this is a new thing in American history, at least in the recent history, and it is certainly not helping and is undermining further American democracy and making it even harder to find compromise, to engage in meaningful dialogue about political differences. So this has been a very bad influence on democratic institutions, also on the constitutional legality of the whole system. We have seen a lot of actions that he took that were unconstitutional, that later on have been reversed or found unconstitutional. So none of this is good. All of this drives us further into division, into polarization, and I think we live at when it comes to just democratic performance and democratic institutionalism, we live in very difficult times, driven and made worse by this current presidency.
With that in mind, I'm curious to ask you about the standing of democracy and whether you think American democracy is in trouble, my friend. How do you think we can recover our sense of democracy and independence? What are your thoughts?
We are in trouble. I mean, this is not this. I think these are historical times. We never have been so divided. Also, wealth has never been so concentrated. We need to find solution and address this. There is no future in this division, this extreme polarization. So the state of democracy in America is right now we're in a precarious state. Overall, if I take a step back, I think we are in a time of backlash. I think we have achieved great progress over the past decades, ever since the civil rights movement, and I think progressively, democracy have been addressing historical issues of exclusion, of white supremacy, of sexism, of racism, of nationalism. And as we address these, what we are seeing now is the backlash against this. We now have people in power who want to well, as they say, make America great again. And I guess what they mean is a time before civil rights, a time before migration, a time before multiculturalism and before religious tolerance. So we are in a critical time. I perceive what we are experiencing right now as a backlash to the overall progressive movement that we find ourselves in. We have been addressing important issues. And so overall, we're on a good trend, but right now we experience in backlash precisely because we have made so much progress.
Yeah, and you talk about this progress, and you earlier this year, obviously, we saw what the Supreme Court did to voting rights in America and the state of voting rights now in America with the midterms coming up. And you say that one of your proactive arguments is that voting itself may not be enough and maybe even part of democracy's challenges. So I'm wondering what led you to that conclusion, and what do you think that many people misunderstand about the relationship between voting and democratic outcomes? What do you want to share with me in that regard, my friend?
Okay, so democracy as it started, and democracy is older than Greece. It goes way back to community life as it started with the human species in Africa, where we all come from. Democracy means self-rule, rule of average people. By itself, it has nothing to do with voting. Over the years and over the decades, we have been made to believe that democracy has to be a regime of, and reduced to elections only. And it turns out that electing officials, professional politicians who then do the business of politics for us, that model seems to be very problematic in itself. So my broader insight is that democracy means self-rule, and self-rule requires participation. We cannot hope that others do politics and democracy for us. We have to be actively involved in politics. And the more we are involved and the more we have control as average people over our democracies, the more we're going to be able to fend off these manipulations, these polarizations, these also all of the fake news that reaches us because we simply do not know how politics and how democracy works. So democracy is not related to voting per se. Ever since the American founding fathers, they already started with a sort of a skepticism against the wisdom of average people. In my sense, this model of leaving the business of politics to a few elites, elected or not, that time is coming to an end, and we need to take back politics and take back democracy. And it's not about voting, it's about participation and actively participating in rule instead of being ruled.
Yeah, and around the world, Professor, you also argue that the American standing in the world isn't what it used to be, and obviously under the current administration, the worldview globally of America is much different than it was even a decade ago before President Trump got into politics. So I'm curious about your perspective on America's standing in the world globally, particularly with the war that's currently going on in the Middle East, and whether you think America's reputation can recover from this point in time in history. What are your thoughts there?
Well, I'm German myself. I'm an American citizen, but I was born and raised and for the first part of my life educated in Germany. And I'm in Spain right now after having been in France and Germany, visiting my parents in Germany. And I can tell you from the conversations I have in Germany, in France, and now here in Spain, where I'm, accompanying a conference, that America is perceived in very different ways than it has before. No longer do people look to the U.S. for as the symbol, as the beacon of democracy and freedom. Everybody is very aware of what is happening around ICE, what is happening with taking illegal actions, what is happening with the people who stormed the Capitol on January 6th and now are offered, or Trump is trying to offer them recompensation, and who have been pardoned also. So people are watching this very carefully. The world is very aware of what goes on in America, and I think America has. And I'm reluctant to say America because the Americas are great. Canada from all the way to South America, but the U.S., in my mind, in my experience, has lost its leadership worldwide and has lost its democratic leadership worldwide. Not its military leadership, which it still has, but its democratic leadership, but also by inviting in outspoken white supremacists like Peter Thiel and Elon Musk, who have a history of white supremacy and defending white supremacy, and by promoting this and interfering in European politics, supporting the extreme right here in Germany with the AfD, or in France with the National Front. So I think the US has lost legitimacy worldwide as a democratic leader, as a beacon of hope and freedom. And that might actually be for the better. I think it is. It has not been a good situation where Europe relies very strongly on the US to solve its problems. I think it's about time for Europe to step up and have its own foreign policy and be able to stand up for democracy on its own. But that's happening right now. The US might have lost its leadership forever because we don't know. From a European perspective, maybe the next president is again more inclined towards the NATO and towards Europe in general. But then who knows what happens after that? And so there has been a really fundamental shift in the perception of the United States worldwide.
Yeah, absolutely. And, Professor, you also make the argument that if Germany can atone for the Holocaust, it's time for America to have a serious conversation about reparations for black people in particular. So I'm wondering your thoughts on what America can learn from its allies overseas when it comes to reparations and their standing in the world more broadly. What are your thoughts, my friend?
Growing up in Germany has taught me one thing. We had to face the horrors of the Holocaust in school. It was a very central part of our curriculum, of our education. In Germany, being a true patriot doesn't mean sweeping bad history under the rug and pretending it never happened. It meant facing it, addressing it, overcoming it. And when I wrote this article, this piece on the reparations, I was talking about the historical debt that the United States owes to African Americans as well as to Native Americans, the two groups that suffered the most in the history of this country. And to achieve justice and to achieve equality, to achieve freedom and justice, it requires equality first. So addressing the historical debt that the country has with Native Americans and with African Americans, I think must be the foundation for justice and peace and a future of living together in a way that is not freed from the burden of the past, but at least where people feel that their needs are taken serious and are being addressed. So I think that's missing right now in the United States. Patriotism is defined as pretending this never happened. The official policy now is not to even talk about this. In some states more than in others. In Texas, where I'm at, certainly very strongly, as well as in Florida. But that's very different from how it was in Germany. And I think in Germany we have to some extent normalized our relationship with Israel, our relationship with Jews. And I think it's an inspiring example. So that's what I meant when I wrote this piece on what the US can learn from Germany when it comes to reparations.
Yeah, absolutely. And, Professor, we're living in sort of authoritarian times where, the U.S. government is trying to sanction what the media is allowed to broadcast and what women's rights are and what diversity, equity, and inclusion is also under threat in the United States. So I'm wondering your thoughts on the state of authoritarianism around the world, but more specifically around the U.S. because it's a dangerous time for practicing the First Amendment, which is a shame. So I'm curious about your thoughts on the state of authoritarianism, both in the U.S. and around the world, because it's an increasing threat. Would you agree with that?
I definitely agree. I think it's very, very worrisome, and of course, we have seen this in the past. Again, as someone who grew up in Germany, I'm very aware of the way that the Nazis came to power and how they also, very similarly to what we see right now, were adverse to free press and called it in the German term Lügenpresse, which is the same as fake news today. So this accusation that the news is fake news, and that is a very dangerous accusation. The freedom of the press and the freedom of opinion and of association must be a cornerstone and must be defended. And we see this being attacked, not just in the United States, under Trump and his minions and the people who work for him and under his different agencies that he has staffed. We also see it in other countries. I'm working on a book right now. It's called The End of Politics. And there I try to make a comparison and argue that the same thing is happening. We see this in Germany, we see this in France, we saw it in Hungary, we saw it in Argentina, in Brazil. So there is a global movement towards this. And in my assessment, it all can be explained by this politics of backlash. Great progress has been made in all of these countries towards achieving more opportunity, more equal opportunity, to securing more fairness, more justice for historically marginalized groups. But the people who have been in power, who have had control over the government, over the state, they now are organizing and hitting back against this progress. And so we see this happening in different countries, in different constellations, be it the empowerment of minorities in Brazil, be it LGBTQ rights in Argentina that have been advanced and now are creating backlash of conservatives, of right-wing people who do not want to live or see this world, this more open, more multicultural, more just world. They are threatened, it seems, by themselves becoming minorities, which, this is a big debate in the United States, we see white groups numerically declining. And I guess the fear that this creates, this is a fear that we see also in Europe. In Europe, this is the origin of the displacement theory, that minorities will displace traditional citizens, white citizens, and therefore threatening white supremacy. So we see this backlash everywhere, and we see these conservative authoritarian responses everywhere, and it's very, very problematic. It's very threatening to democracy. I guess I want to finish this by saying, as a white man, I want to say that, we should not be, as white people, threatened by other groups. I think it is important that we find a way to live together based on justice, equal opportunity, and address undue privileges that we might have, and assort different ways for everybody to have equal opportunity. And if that means no longer controlling everything, that's fine. So we should make peace with this instead of trying to defend and uphold white supremacy.
Yeah, and building on that discussion, you talk about closing, privilege gaps, and when we talk about economic inequality, it's also, as you make the argument closely connected to democratic instability. And I'm curious, with affordability and the cost of living today, and when we can even look at the cost of sporting tickets, for example, the cost of economic inequality is really sort of pigeonholing the average American to live in a certain, economic class. So I'm curious to ask you about the relationship between economic instability and democratic inequality. How do you think those two things are interconnected?
Well, I think it's very important to recognize, and we have a lot of scholars and a lot of a lot of people in throughout history have recognized that you cannot really have true democracy understood in this way as the rule of average people, self-rule, if you have an extreme concentration of wealth. This goes back all the way to even the Roman Republic, where whenever there was a concentration of wealth, this does not bode well with self-rule. You cannot really have self-rule in a community, no matter how large the community, if one person owns half of the assets. You cannot make decisions together if one person controls all the media. This is not good. It's a problem, needs to be addressed. I have suggested upper limits to wealth, upper limits to income. We talk too much, in my mind, about minimum wages. I think we should shift the discussion about maximum wages. We live on a planet that's finite. At some point, we ought to talk about what is enough. It's so. I think this is an important question. It's undermining self-rule. It's undermining the ability to take decisions together. So we need to address the excesses of the system where we have some people living outside of the system. Most of them not even paying the same amount of taxes that we pay as income earners because they live on their assets on their wealth. And that's not good for democracy. It can't work if some people are able to just exit the system because they're so wealthy and guarantee a bright future for their kids because they can put them in all these elite institutions, give them all this elite support. So this will drive polarization even further. It does not sit well. It does not bode well for democracy, and it's a serious problem. Yeah. So yes.
Yeah, absolutely. And as you know, Professor, the midterms in America are coming up in November, and you make the argument that we need to consider democratic innovation in politics today. And I'm wondering your thoughts on not only the midterms and what that means for the future of U.S. government, but the concept of democratic innovation and what you want people to know about the importance of innovation in politics. What are your thoughts there, my friend?
Well, I think we need to, as citizens, find ways to be courageous and to embrace and look for promising solutions. How can we save our democracy? How can we defend equal opportunity? How can we defend fairness? How can we defend justice? We cannot leave it to professional politicians or political class. So when I talk about political innovation, I'm talking about looking around the world and see how different countries, different societies at different times have addressed these problems, because the problems are always the same. The problems are, on the one side, economic. We have a tendency of concentration of wealth. They are political. People do not feel represented by their representatives, and they're ecological. We live in a finite world, in an ecosystem that's threatened. So the problems are the same across time in the world, and I think we need to look around and find promising solutions everywhere. We cannot afford to only look in our own countries and hope that we can find the solutions there. I think there's much to be learned from different solutions across the globe. And that for the midterms, I mean, I don't know. I mean, what we see in the midterms is, of course, this attempt to manipulate districts. And, I perceive this as the last and desperate attempt of a group of people that feel threatened by the changes that are inevitable. The world is changing. The world is becoming more open. Migration will not end. People want to move and will move. Human mobility will only increase. We have to face it. And the people who are threatened by this threatened by these changes, threatened by the gradual empowerment of minorities, of women in politics, of minorities in politics. They are staging their last desperate attempts to hold on to power. And right now they're trying to do this by manipulating voting districts. So it's a very sad spectacle to watch. I hope they're not successful. I hope that that the people find a way to elect those people that actually represent them and their interests. I think the whole institution of the electoral college is bad for democracy. I think the popular vote is what really matters. But in the midterms, I'm hoping that these manipulations of the voting districts do not further push in the United States, do not further push African Americans to the margins. They are already not as represented as they should be, as they have been in the past. We have a very, very tilted representation of African Americans. They're underrepresented in positions of power, in political positions, and that's not good. So I hope that people see through this, and I hope that people vote based on whom they think can represent their interests the best. And I hope they're not distracted too much by religion and ideology and lies, frankly.
And I know, Professor, a large portion of your work has to do with, decolonizing the knowledge of the Earl-centric narratives, as we've been discussing. So what do you want people to know about, decolonization and the role it plays in politics today, my friend?
Well, I have the privilege of being a professor in a research university, and that has allowed me to travel the world and to conduct research and explore in different societies across the globe. And I come across very interesting groups and societies all over the world, not just in the global north. So decolonization to me means including the voices of those who have historically not been heard. I'm talking about women, I'm talking about the voice of minorities, but I'm also talking about voices and experiences from Latin America, from Africa, from Asia, because we can learn a lot from all of these experiences. About 2 years ago, I spent a summer in Botswana, and I was very, very impressed by their system of village assemblies. Every village in Botswana has a public assembly place. They call it Kotla. And they meet there as average citizens, and they talk about politics, and they hold their politicians accountable. They call them in, and it's very, very inspiring. So there are models across the globe that can inspire us, and not just in Germany or France or the United States, but also in African countries and different Latin American countries. So there's much to be learned from I would say, those voices that historically have not been heard. So I would urge all of us to open our eyes wide and see the richness of the world in terms of experiences and learnings that we can have when we focus not just narrowly on the European or North American experience.
Yeah, and Professor, I'm interested to ask you specifically about the role of women and how they can reassert their sort of influence in not only American politics, but in societal life in general. And I'm curious, what do you think the role of women specifically will have on the future of politics, both in America and globally as well?
Now, if you look historically about systems that have been democratic, again starting all the way from egalitarian hunter-gatherers in Africa, you can almost assess the quality of their democracy, the quality of their self-rule, by looking at the women. The more power women had, the more democratic these societies were. So, power. And it goes along with, or historically went along with empires. So it was men who constructed the first empires, and they squashed these smaller egalitarian societies where women had more of a standing. And we're still living in this legacy of empire, big empires, male-dominated warrior cultures, and all of that stuff. So I think that the quality of democracy can be assessed by the extent to which women have access to power and are not subjugated and are not confined to to the private sphere or to the household as they were, for example, in Greece. The Greek democracy, as inspiring as it might be, women had no say, women had no voice. They were part of the household, and we see similar scenarios today in different societies, and that does not bode well with democracy. So we can assess the quality of democracy by assessing the power of women, the relative power of women compared to men, and also the visibility they have in the public sphere.
Yeah, and Professor, when the historians look back on this period of time in American politics, I'm wondering, how do you think historians will characterize this time when they look back on it 50 years from now?
Well, I think they will recognize that we have made great progress. We had the first black president with Barack Obama. We started in the United States addressing sort of historical deficits when it comes to investing in its own people, in healthcare, in housing, in transportation. And now we see the backlash to this. I'm hoping that this will, from in the 50-year distance, only be like a wrinkle in this general history of progress. It's time for the United States to invest in its own people, to invest in healthcare, in housing, in public transportation, in education, instead of investing in military and investing in people in other countries through the military. I think this is something that we see happening reluctantly, little by little. And I think historians will hopefully look back at this time and say, well, there was resistance against this progressive movement by those who want to hold on and defend their historical unearned privilege. But this was overcome, and we're moving in the direction of more justice, more fairness, more opportunity by including more people, by raising the voice of those who have not been heard in the past. So I'm hoping that we are in general on this path, and that people will look back at the Trump presidency as a backlash, as a wrinkle, as a setback in this history, but in general that we are advancing. That's my hope.
Yeah, absolutely. And, Professor, I'm curious to ask your opinion on, for anyone watching or listening to this who may feel concerned about the future of democracy, but are unsure on how to, start contributing to changing the conversation or influencing the conversation in a more positive direction. What practical steps can American citizens take, and citizens around the world can take to make sure that democracy and freedom of choice and opinion is preserved? What are your thoughts, my friend?
I think that we are already seeing some movements that address these questions. There's a transition movement that's global underway right now. And if you are a citizen in wherever you live, if you Google and look up transition movement, you will find some people who, instead of waiting on the government and on their leaders to solve issues for them, they have decided to organize themselves. And I think this is the way to go. I think we don't need better leaders. I think we need less leaders. We need to rely less on leadership and take matters into our own hands. And the more we do, the less we need to rely on these elites, elected or not, that make decisions for us. And I think this is underway. And I think it means taking steps in your own neighborhood, with your neighbors, with your friends, in your community, to rebuild community, to rebuild trust, to defend the spaces where we can come together and talk about things that we do not agree on. Right now, we far too often only meet with people that we agree with, but we need to, for democracy to survive, find spaces where we can interchange ourselves, learn, deliberate, interchange different ideas. And that will not come from politics. That will not come from politicians or presidents. That's something that we all have to do on our own, rebuild our communities, rebuild these spaces of conversation. And I think it's happening already. I would recommend looking for the transition movement. It's happening almost everywhere in the world.
Yeah. Just because I am personally curious, Professor, I live in Canada, but I also have American family, and I also was born with cerebral palsy. And when we look at diversity, equity, and inclusion and education, and around America's perception of the concept now. It's kind of under threat, and it kind of makes me sad for people that are disabled or want to be included in American society because of the way that DE&I is currently being perceived. So I'm curious to get your message for people with disabilities and their standing in America and the world and the importance that they still have on societal life. What are your thoughts?
Well, I think we on a hope. I do think I'm a positive. I'm positive. I'm a I guess optimist in this sense that I do think we are on a path of addressing this, and I think it's very very important to recognize dignity in everybody, even beyond humans, and to treat everybody with dignity and work and defend the dignity of those who have been discriminated against, who have been silenced, who have been shut out of conversations. And I think in general, we are moving in this direction. And I would tell people with disabilities that do not wait on your politicians. I mean, as long as we have a system that we have right now, yes, vote for those people who stand up for you and for other minority groups that have been discriminated or marginalized, but also don't wait on politicians, don't wait on the state. Find ways to organize among the people. Democracy means self-rule. Democracy means it's the people themselves who organize themselves. It's not politicians who will solve our problems. It's ourselves, and I think that is true for disabled people. It's also true for minorities. It's true for everybody. And let's not be distracted by by manipulations that pitch us against each other based on religion or culture. This is not about that. This is about policy. This is about very concrete proposals for how should we organize our economic lives, our professional lives. So we should not let ourselves be pitched against each other based on these very foundational religious and ideological differences. So get together, organize is what I would say.
Yeah, absolutely. And, Professor, I'm also curious to ask you about your take on the 2028 presidential election. Where you see the future of American politics going? And, throughout the course of your career, you've also been, optimistic about complex and challenging questions in politics and society. So I'm curious to ask you about what you perceive for the upcoming presidential election in a couple of years, and what has you most optimistic about the future of the political times that we're living in, despite the obstacles that we face today? What are your thoughts?
I think after Trump, there will be a great opportunity to finally address all of the problems that the US society is facing. Again, we have been investing far too much in foreign countries, in the military, trying to bring democracy to Iraq and now Iran and Afghanistan and all these different countries. Trump offered, I think, $100,000 to each citizens of Greenland, but that money, I'm hoping a time will come after, and it comes hoping. I think there's a chance for it to come in the next elections, that this money gets spent on American citizens, on people who live in the United States, so that we can invest in healthcare, in housing, in education, in public transportation, all these things that make a country great. And I think there will be a great opportunity, because I know that Trump is very unpopular even among his supporters right now. His approval rates have been falling. People who voted for him, some of them, not all, but some of them are regretful. And I think this will give us a great opportunity to finally address these things that we started addressing under Obama and under Biden, before that also to some extent. And I think it's finally, this time will come. I think the time will come to address and provide healthcare for everybody, housing, transportation for everybody. So I think there is I'm optimistic that this will happen. I'm optimistic because I know that support for Trump is waning, is falling. I think it will be a chance to address all of these issues.
Yeah, Professor, I've got two questions left for you, and the first of those two questions is this: I'm curious to ask you about the state of the Supreme Court and law in America today, and the Supreme Court has never been as unpopular as it is right now because it's basically stacked with loyalists to President Trump on the conservative side at the moment. So I'm curious about the state of law in America today. What has you most concerned and optimistic about the state of the American Supreme Court, my friend?
Well, I think you already said it. We never, I only been in the United States since 1998, but I have never seen or even read about a time where the Supreme Court was so politicized. And, as a political scientist, we are taught that the Supreme Court must stand above politics. And it has not under Trump. Trump has politicized the Supreme Court. By doing so, I think the Supreme Court has lost a lot of its legitimacy. And I think people have lost faith in the Supreme Court. So it has lost a lot of its prestige, its perception of being standing above politics because it has been politicized, just like everything else has been politicized, the presidency itself, the FBI. Everything has been politicized. This is not good for democracy. This is not good for the rule of law. It's very, very worrisome. And it will be, this is my prediction for the time after Trump. And I'm very confident that there will be a very, very solid and a massive democratic majority in both houses and in the presidency. But that will be a challenge. How can we change the Supreme Court to avoid this? Not just now, to bring it back and restore its status as a nonpartisan institution, but also how can we secure it for the future? We cannot live in a system where the next president comes around and does the same thing and we have it politicized again. This will be difficult. I'm not sure if the solution is more members of the nomination process has to change, or maybe forced retirement or something, but something has to be done, and I'm not quite sure what the solution is. But the Supreme Court has lost its status, has lost its standing as a nonpartisan institution, and we need to do something about it. And I'm hopeful that I know this will be one of the biggest tasks of the next legislation to come after 28.
Yeah, absolutely. And, Professor, my final question for you this morning has to do with your own personal and professional legacy. When you look back on your body of work and your contributions to political discussions both in America and abroad, how do you want your personal and professional legacy to be defined?
Well, I hope that, I've been publishing books and writing articles, and I've been teaching. I'm very happy to be an educator. I want my legacy to be recognized as someone who contributed and did their part within what I can do within my profession as an educator, as a researcher, to stand up for democracy, to defend the rule of law, to defend the Constitution, to live up to the challenges of our times with critical thinking, with different approaches, not just blindly following, but rather looking around, learning, always being open to learn. And I'm hoping that within my role as an educator and researcher, I'm living up to that. That's what I'm trying, and that's going to hopefully be my legacy as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And finally, Professor, if people want to get connected with you and contact you about the good work that you're doing, what's the best way they can do that?
I have a website. It's my name, Bernd Reiter, PhD.com. So it's a German name, so it's not, most people don't know how to pronounce or spell it. It's Bernd Reiter, BerndReiter, PhD.com. So www.berndreiterphd.com. That's my website. What I do is on there. My books are on there, my articles. So if people are interested in following me and learning more about my work, they can find me there.
Well, fabulous. I want to thank you for this wide-ranging discussion about the American democracy, democracy around the world, and the global standing, and snapshot in politics today, Professor. You've got a very diverse perspective, and I want to thank you for sharing it with me this morning, and also sharing your passion for a need for more political education so that we can all be invested in the democratic process. Your time and attention on my behalf is most appreciated, and I want to thank you for being here today. It's most appreciated.
Well, thank you very much. I really appreciate the opportunity, and again, want to congratulate you on doing this important work.